Hello again, everyone. We have got another knowledge lesson today where we are going to learn about another amazing person. We have already learned a lot about some extraordinary people that lived in America and fought for change. We've talked about Miss Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony fought for women's suffrage, or the right for women to be able to vote. We talked about Eleanor Roosevelt, who fought for human rights for all sorts of groups of people. Remember, she was married to the President of the United States during what we call the Great Depression. During this time, many people in America did not have jobs and could not afford homes or food or an education. Eleanor felt that these were things that all people should have just because they're human. So she fought to give those rights and those things to everyone. She worked with Mary McLeod Bethune. Mary McLeod Bethune wanted to make sure that African American girls were being given the chance to have an education. She eventually opened up a college and a hospital and a library and served on the Black Cabinet and acted as an advisor for 3 different United States presidents. We talked about Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in sports, or made it so that African American players and white players could play on the same major league teams. We talked about Rosa Parks, who was very brave and refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white person and started the civil rights movement. She's called the mother of the civil rights movement. In our last lesson, we talked about a very important or significant member of the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He believed very strongly in protesting in nonviolent ways, such as speeches, sit-ins, and marches. And he did a lot to make this country a fairer place for everyone. Today, we are going to learn about this man right here. This man is Cesar Chavez. Like Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez was a civil rights activist. He lived in America during the time of the Great Depression, and he fought for a group of people called migrant workers later in his life. Migrant workers were people who moved from farm to work at harvesting crops. These migrant workers were not treated very fairly, and he fought for them to have better treatment and better pay for the work that they did. We will talk about him today, but first we need to go over our vocabulary words. Migrant workers. Migrant workers were people who travel from one area to another, usually in search of work, such as harvesting crops. Migrant workers might travel long and far to find work during harvest season. Instructing. Instructing means teaching or guiding someone to do something. Today, I will be instructing you on the safest way to snowboard down the mountain, announced the snowboarding instructor. Heritage. Heritage is culture, traditions, and items that are handed down from generation to generation. Akna was proud of her Inuit heritage and enjoyed attending the Inuit cultural festivals with her family. Plight. A plight is a very difficult or bad situation. Eleanor Roosevelt was saddened to see the plight of all the people without jobs during the Great Depression. I'm going to describe a couple of different situations. If what I describe is an example of a plight or difficult or sad situation, I want you to say, "That is a plight." If what I describe is not an example of a difficult or sad situation, say, "That is not a plight." Our first one When victims of an earthquake need to rebuild their damaged homes. That is a plight. What about when a family takes a walk together in a park? That one's not a plight. What about when a sports team wins a tournament? That is not a plight either. When birds lose their habitat or homes because of a forest fire. That one is a plight. Organizer. An organizer is someone who brings people and ideas together to accomplish a particular goal. A great organizer was needed to help run the school's fair. Strikes. Strikes are stoppages of work until those in a position of power, such as employers, grant certain demands, such as higher pay or better working conditions. Some strikes last a long time until the employer and the workers agree on a fair solution to their disagreements. Cesar Chavez was born in 1927 in the Gila River Valley near Yuma, Arizona. As the second of 6 children, Cesar and his siblings loved to explore the golden desert landscape and to gaze up at the sparkling desert sky that seemed to stretch on forever. Cesar was named after his grandfather, who had come to the United States from Mexico in the 1880s. So his grandfather was an immigrant to the United States. Cesar's grandfather had settled on a small ranch in the Gila River Valley. This was the very same ranch on which Cesar and his family now lived and worked. The Chavez family worked hard, and their farm was prosperous. Remember, prosperous means thriving or making money. Then, tragedy struck. Rain stopped falling in the Gila River Valley, first one year and then the next. Without rain, the crops could not grow, and the cattle died. This was also the time of the Great Depression, and Cesar's family, like so many others, lost their home. There was nothing else to do but sell the ranch. Remember, we learned about the Great Depression earlier. The Great Depression was when many Americans lost their jobs and did not have enough money for homes or food. And so, when he was 10 years old, Cesar and his family moved to California to become migrant workers, people who traveled from farm to farm, picking fruits and vegetables during harvest time. Like most migrant workers, Cesar and his family were poor and were often treated unfairly by the people who hired them. They were paid very little money for the work that they did, and that work was very difficult. Cesar and his family had to live in many different migrant worker camps. The camps were overcrowded, and many families had to share one bathroom. The Chavez family missed their ranch. They dreamed of going back to Arizona one day and buying back their home. However, migrant workers earned just a few cents a day for the back-breaking work that they did. There was no chance of ever being able to save money. Cesar's family was considered to be Hispanic because they were originally from the Spanish-speaking country of Mexico. Hispanic or Latino people, just like African Americans, faced discrimination and segregation. However, Cesar's family celebrated their Mexican heritage and spoke Spanish, the language of their ancestral home. Although it wasn't always easy, Cesar did go to school in various places in California. In fact, he went to more than 30 different schools. He later said that he was lucky to have graduated from middle school because his family moved around so much. Later in his life, Cesar told a story about an incident that happened to him at school. One day, Cesar accidentally spoke Spanish instead of English in his classroom. His teacher was not happy with him, and Cesar thought that he had done something wrong. Cesar felt that he had been treated unfairly, and it made him sad. It was not possible for Cesar to go on to high school. He was needed to work in the fields. However, during World War II, Cesar wanted to serve his country. He joined the Navy, and his family was very proud of him. After 2 years in the U.S. Navy, Cesar returned to life as a migrant farm worker. Soon after his return, Cesar met and fell in love with Helen Fabela. The couple married and moved to San Jose, California. Cesar was one of the many Latino people who worked as migrant workers, moving from farm to farm, harvesting fruits and vegetables. The work was so hard and the hours were so long that many workers found that their health suffered. They worked 7 days a week, often 14 hours a day, for very little pay. If they were injured or became sick, they found it difficult to pay medical bills. These migrant workers were only employed during harvest time. And of course, migrant workers did not earn money when bad weather prevented them from working while waiting for crops to ripen, or when they had to travel from job to job. Cesar believed that something had to change. He believed that these migrant workers deserved to be treated more fairly. He set out to change the treatment of farm workers, and especially migrant workers, in California. One day, Cesar met an organizer for a social service group known as the Community Service Organization, also known as the CSO. This organization also wanted to improve the lives of Latino people. Cesar volunteered to be a CSO community organizer. He went from farm to farm, helping some farm workers with their day-to-day problems, and instructing others on how to become U.S. citizens. He encouraged all farm workers to register to vote, and he helped to register thousands of new voters. Immediately, some of the farm owners thought Cesar was a troublemaker. Cesar was shy. He did not like speaking in front of large groups of people, but he knew that his work was important. He became the leader of a new CSO group in California. In addition to speaking Spanish, Cesar spoke very good English. As a result, he was able to communicate with both the farm owners, most of whom spoke only English, and the farm workers, most of whom spoke Spanish. Slowly, many farm workers became brave enough to attend meetings and rallies organized by Cesar. Without intending to, Cesar had become a labor leader and a civil rights activist. Cesar believed that all farm workers needed a union to represent their best interests. A union is a large, organized group of workers who join together and elect leaders to speak for them. The union leaders try to make sure the members' needs are being met. Cesar knew that a union would have the power to increase wages or pay and provide health care for farm workers. So he and his friend, Dolores Huerta, decided to set up a union called the National Farm Workers Association. Cesar said, "You are never strong enough that you don't need help." And the union was intended to provide that help. Within 2 years, they had 1,000 members. Cesar thought Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had the right idea about protesting in a nonviolent way. He decided to do the same thing. Cesar led marches, fasts, and boycotts, but never violent protests. One of the most important farm worker strikes that Cesar led was against grape growers in California. So remember, a strike is a stoppage of work that continues until an employer and the workers agree on things such as more wages or better working conditions. At the time, Cesar said, "The fight is never about grapes or lettuce. It is always about people." The strike began in Delano, California, where grape growers had decided to cut the little pay the farm workers received. So the workers were earning even less money. Cesar responded by organizing not only a strike, but a protest march too. Thousands of farm workers set off for the state capital of Sacramento. They walked for hours each day in the hot sunshine. More and more workers left the vineyards and joined in the march. People across the nation noticed what was happening. Many people refused to buy California grapes in sympathy for the plight of the workers. While farm workers were marching, they weren't harvesting the valuable grapes. The farm owners watched in horror as their precious crops withered and died on the vine. They discovered that without their workers, they would lose money. The farm owners recognized Cesar's union and agreed to discuss higher wages and health care for the farm workers. The farm workers' march to Sacramento became the longest protest march in American history. This was indeed a victory, but there was more work to be done. Cesar defended farm workers and migrant workers in many other cases of unfair treatment. Thousands of people joined his union. His union opened offices all over the country. Eventually, Cesar's union became known as the United Farm Workers. Later, the United Farm Workers protested against grape growers who used pesticides or poisons intended to kill insects, mice, and rats on their crops. These pesticides harmed workers who harvested the grapes. Cesar called for another boycott of California grapes. Throughout his lifetime, Cesar dedicated himself to working for the rights of poor migrant farm workers who seemed to have no voice in society. So this doesn't mean that they didn't actually have a voice and couldn't talk. It just means that they didn't have much power, so not many people listened to them. Cesar Chavez died in 1993. Thousands of people attended his funeral. 1 year after his death, Cesar was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. His wife, Helen, accepted the award. During his lifetime, Cesar often encouraged his fellow farm workers by saying, "Si se puede," yes, we can. And he certainly did. All right, my friends, we learned a lot about Cesar Chavez today. Do you remember where Cesar Chavez was born? Cesar Chavez was born in the Gila River Valley near Yuma, Arizona. Arizona is the state right here in green, closer to the west coast of the United States. What did Cesar's family do after the ranch that they lived on in the Gila River Valley dried out? When they had a drought that devastated their ranch, what did they do? You've got it. They moved first to the state of California, shown here in orange, and there they worked as migrant workers. What was a migrant worker? What did they do? What kind of work did they do? Exactly. They worked for farm owners, and they moved from farm to farm to help harvest crops or to pick crops. Was life as a migrant worker easy? Life as a migrant worker was very hard. They had to move from place to place. They were paid very little. They worked every day of the week, and they worked very long hours. Why did Cesar Chavez decide to fight for the cause of migrant workers? Why did he decide to fight for that cause? I had a poster fall down. It scared me a little. I'm sorry if I jumped. Chavez fought for migrant workers because he had experienced firsthand how hard it was for them, and he felt that they deserved to be treated better. In what way was Cesar's fight for human rights based on what Martin Luther King Jr. did in his fight for civil rights? Did they both believe that they should use violence to fight for their cause? No, of course not. They both believed the opposite. They believed that the best way to fight for their causes was to use nonviolence. They gave speeches, they organized boycotts, they organized marches, things like that didn't hurt anyone physically. How did the grape growers feel about the strike and march that Cesar Chavez organized? Do you think they liked it? Probably not. Why wouldn't they like it? What happened to their grapes? Without anyone to harvest their grapes, they withered and died, and the farm owners and grape growers lost money. Cesar, like many other of these other amazing activists that we've learned about, thought that it was very important for people to vote for the people who would represent them in government. Why do you think all of these people felt that the right to vote was so important? Talk about that one with whoever is helping you today. When you are finished wrapping up your conversation, go ahead and open up the PDF that's attached to this assignment. We are going to do another free verse poem. This one, of course, will be about Cesar Chavez. And right here below Martin Luther King Jr. on our timeline. I'm going to move over to my computer so I can help give you some ideas for our poem. We are, of course, doing another free verse poem today. Today, our free verse poem will be about Cesar Chavez. Go ahead and open up that PDF that's attached to this assignment if you haven't already. Like me, you might want to turn your paper on its side using our menu. We have one of those rotate buttons. And we'll want to put Cesar Chavez's name right in the middle, since that he is the subject of our poem, or the person that our poem is going to be about. Remember, this bubble map helps me plan my writing. It helps me remember the important things about Cesar Chavez that I might want to include in my poem, and it will help me organize my thoughts about my opinion on him and what kind of person I think he was. Your bubble maps might look different than my bubble map, and that's okay. They don't have to be exactly the same, but you can use some of my ideas or use them as a jumping point for your own different ideas as well. Cesar Chavez, like Martin Luther King Jr., who we learned about in our last lesson, was a civil rights activist. Civil rights activists wanted everyone to have the same rights. Remember, at this time in America, many people did not have the same rights as white people, people with different colored skin. And today we learned it was not just African Americans, but also Latino or Hispanic people as well were not treated fairly. What kind of people did Cesar Chavez fight for? What group of people did he fight for? He fought for migrant workers or farmers. These migrant workers moved from farm to farm to help harvest crops or pick crops out of the earth. These migrant workers were not treated well, and Cesar Chavez wanted to change that. Also, like Martin Luther King Jr., he believed that the best way to change that was through nonviolence. He gave a lot of speeches and organized marches. But of course, we know that Cesar Chavez was shy. He didn't necessarily like speaking in front of people. But this cause was so important to him, he got up and did it anyway, all the time. One thing that he did to help these migrant workers is he created what is called a union. So a union is a group of employees who work together to select a leader to represent them to their employers. So when employers are not treating the people that work for them fairly, union leaders will stand up for all of the employees to the employer or the person that hired them that they're working for. His union grew so large. There were thousands and thousands of people that joined the union to help fight for migrant workers. Go ahead and fill in these other 3 bubbles with other things you remember about Cesar Chavez. A good idea to put in these bubbles, I don't have any on mine yet, would be adjectives that describe what kind of person Cesar Chavez was. What kind of adjectives would you use to describe him? When you are finished with your bubbles, that means you are finished with your planning, and you've got all of your thoughts about Cesar Chavez down, and that means you are ready to move on to writing your free verse poem. When you are ready to write your free verse poem, we'll want to move, our page back the right side up, and we'll come down to our next page, which has a picture of grapes. Remember, he organized a boycott of grapes. A boycott is when you refuse to use a good or service as a form of protest. And of course, we have a picture of Cesar Chavez here as well. I'm going to use his name as my title. There we go, going too fast. Remember, your free verse poem does not have to rhyme. There is not a set amount of syllables or words that each line has to have. And your lines don't have to be complete sentences. You can use words or phrases to explain what your opinion about Cesar Chavez is, and to tell your audience about the work that he did. When you are finished with your poem, as always, go ahead and turn that one in up at the top, and you will be all finished with knowledge today. I will see you guys next time.